to be going over the labor market. You're going to see a lot of similarities between the labor market and basic supply and demand that you learned earlier or other types of market structures. So before you go into this, make sure you understand supply and demand, make sure you understand different types of market structures, and then you'll be able to understand the labor market really well. So remember the circular flow model. If you don't know it, basically our economy is all connected. Households buy products from firms, so they give money to firms. Firms make a profit. Firms outsource or they give their product to the factors. What that means is factories. Factories produce these goods, which the households kind of buy. So it's kind of a circle. Additionally, those same firms and those factor markets provide an income to households so that they can spend more. So it's all a big circle where everything is connected, where our purchasing and our income is all connected. Before, you've learned about households, you learned about individuals, how they're going to buy stuff based on utility and all those different things. You've learned about different firm structure. Now we're going to be talking about factors and the types of factor markets, okay? So basically, a factor market is the market for businesses for workers. So it works very similarly to basic supply and demand. You have labor demand and labor supply. And that's very similar to what we've done. Demand is a downward sloping line. Downward sloping line, and supply is an upward sloping line. Supply or labor supply is simply how many workers are available. So for instance, there's going to be a lot of doctors, but there might not be that many basket weavers, or I don't know, some niche profession. Demand for labor is all derived upon, do we need this product? Let's say you're producing garments, right? Do we need clothing? Yeah, then we have a high demand for it. So demand is all about, do we need this product? Do we need this worker? Demand is how much businesses want of workers. So we have supply and we have demand. This is our basic labor market. Supply, demand, and an equilibrium. Equilibrium is how much they'll be paid and how many workers are available. Now, in the real world, we typically have a minimum wage. A minimum wage functions very similarly to a price floor from what you learned. It's simply a minimum amount that people need to be paid. So because of this, just like a price floor, it creates a surplus. There's a surplus amount of workers. That's why when you hear on the news or in politicians, they don't want to increase the minimum wage because then more and more people will be unemployed because we'll have a higher surplus. And then obviously there's no price ceiling because there's no maximum wage we're going to offer people, right? So the minimum wage is all you're going to deal with here. And just remember, it works just like a price floor. Now, this basic labor supply and demand works for an entire market. The entire market operates on labor supply and demand. So we have to understand factor demand and factor supply. We can shift demand based on the price of a product. This is what many people call derived demand, where basically the demand for a good or demand for the labor of a good depends on how valuable the product is. So for instance, let's say we're producing PlayStation 5s, right? And everyone wants PlayStation 5s. Well, then the labor demand for PlayStation 5s is going to be really high because firms are going to want those types of workers. But then let's say PlayStation 5s are really, really unpopular and that no one wants them. Well, then there's going to be no demand for workers. So most of it comes from the price of a product. That's the main shift. That's the main determinant of demand. And based on that, that can shift demand. Then we have productivity. Productivity is just how productive a worker is. So a more productive worker is more expensive overall. So that can shift demand as well. And then a change in price of raw materials. Supply is a lot of different things. Remember, labor supply is simply what professions you want to be a part of, right? So let's say your parents pressured you to become a doctor at a young age. Well, then that might impact labor supply, right? So there's a lot of different things that can do this, right? Like how good a job is. Are gas station workers highly paid? If so, then maybe labor supply is going to be a bit high. availability on alternative options, the education and training on stuff, a huge amount of things. Just remember, it's your willingness and your ability to join some sort of job. So there's a lot of different things, but most of it is cultural, okay? So now we understand the basic idea of labor supply and demand. But remember, this is just the entire market. This is the entire nation or an entire world, the labor supply and labor demand. But we have specific market structures we have to cover. First is perfect labor competition, which is very similar to our perfect competition we covered back when we were talking about firm structure. Perfect labor competition is saying there's a lot of different firms. Typically, they're very small and they demand and supply workers. Okay? So the main characteristics are it's many small firms typically. Many workers have identical skills. They're not very differentiated. The wage is constant. No one's going to be paid more or less because everyone has the same skills. If everyone has the same skills, there's no reason for your wage to be higher or lower. And then workers are wage takers. That means workers don't have a lot of negotiating power. They just have to take the wage that is given. So that's perfect labor competition. The way we graph that is this, with supply being constant and demand being a downward sloping line. Why is this? Well, supply is simply how many people want to be a part of some sort of organization or job, right? So that's a fixed supply when we're thinking in the short term or when we're thinking on a micro scale. So it's a line just like this. It's equal to marginal revenue cost. Demand is a downward sloping line. Why? Because of the diminishing marginal returns. The more workers we hire, the less money we make because there's just too many workers, right? Remember the idea of diminishing marginal returns. So because of it, it's a downward sloping line. We don't need all these workers. Additionally, if you remember profit maximizing, the way a firm profit maximizes here is when marginal revenue cost equals marginal revenue price of a product. So it's just this intersection right here. So that's perfect competition. We also have a monopsony. Not a monopoly, a monopsony. Very similar to monopoly though. It's typically one firm hiring workers, like a monopoly. The workers don't have a lot of negotiating power. They can't move. They have to stay where they're being operated. And the firm is the wage maker. The firm can decide how much people are being paid because there's not a lot of competition. They could have $100 an hour. They could have $10 an hour, right? Typically, they have the lowest possible wage, okay? And then here's the general graph. It's a little bit more complicated. Again, demand is still downward sloping. Supply is an upward sloping line, but then marginal revenue cost is this another line here that's a bit higher than the supply curve, okay? So that's the general idea of a monopsony. And this is a general graph you do need to know. So here's two different questions. Pause the video, try to solve them. Now we're going to go over them. A firm in a perfectly competitive labor market hires workers to produce hats. The market wage is $20 per hour. The marginal revenue product of the fifth worker is $30, and the marginal revenue product of sixth worker is $18. Which of the following is the profit maximizing number of workers the firm should hire? Well, you should automatically notice that we're getting $20. We're paying $20 per hour, and the fifth worker is getting $30 or earning $30. That means that fifth worker is more profitable because we earn more money than we spend. So obviously we're going to hire them. So we're going to hire the fifth worker. But should we hire the sixth worker? I don't think so. Because we're going to earn $18, but they cost $20. So because of that, we're only going to hire 5 workers. So the answer here is B. So remember, it's just marginal revenue price equal marginal revenue cost. And you want to find what's more profitable. And if you can't think of it like that, just figure out, hey, is this going to help the business or hurt the business? Is 18 bigger than 20? No, but the 30 is bigger than 20. So just figure that out. In a perfectly competitive labor market, the equilibrium wage is $12 per hour, and the equilibrium quantity of labor is 100 workers. The government imposes a minimum wage of $15. What will happen in this market? So remember, a minimum wage works just like a price floor, okay? It creates a surplus. It increases unemployment, okay? That's the main gripe and main issue many people have and many politicians have with a higher minimum wage. Because it's a price floor and increases unemployment, the quantity of labor demanded will fall and it creates unemployment. That's completely right. So it's C. The quantity of labor demanded is going to fall from firms because firms are going to have to pay more. So because of that, boom, unemployment. So that's the general idea of a minimum wage. So now you understand the basic ideas of a labor market and factor market, how we're going to understand labor demand and labor supply, and the basic ideas of a minimum wage, how all these things work. Obviously, there's more details that you can get into, but for any college class, introductory microeconomics, AP microeconomics, this is mostly everything you're going to cover, okay? And this is mostly what you need to know.